Good morning, friends. We are in the studio this morning with good friend Keith Schofield. He is our senior broker, realtor emeritus, senior advisory counsel with Setheth Realty. But he's also a bastion of great knowledge and history for the city of Augusta. You're on the Historical Society, right?
Right, have been for several years.
We thought we would talk this morning about Augusta and specifically things that relate to real estate. And the utilities are something that we take for granted. We turn the water on and out comes delicious, cool water in the summertime. But what is the history of the water in Augusta? And just exactly how did it start when we were a small town, just around Main Street and Clark? And I mean, it's hard to imagine where we started, but maybe you could help us have a picture of what we was looking at there.
Well, the best that I know is originally everyone had their own water well and their own privy out back.
So you'd have a water well on a little bitty city lot and then out by the alley, huh?
Out back somewhere. The lots may not have been as small as they are now, but they probably were. They didn't think about cross-contamination or pollution from their neighbors or anything like that. That's just the way life was. They'd come here from the country where they did as they pleased. But that's the way most everybody had water, was from the well. And eventually they even went as far as to dig a well downtown on State Street before it was paved for the community. Somebody that didn't have a well, or somebody coming through town or coming into town from the country needed some water, they had a well there.
Now that well, there's a picture of that at the Historical Society, right? What 100 block estate was that?
That was approximately in the middle of the 500 block, which would be somewhere around where the bank was, Cooper Drug, right in that vicinity.
So I know there used to be a dip in the street there. Is it still there where that well was at?
Some people think that's where the well was. I'm not exactly sure where that is.
I know the amazing thing I seen when I looked at the pictures was, it was a dirt street.
Well,
and
dirt,
horses and manure, and right in the middle of it was that well.
Right.
Now, Augusta would have been pretty small at that time, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how far north of 7th Street would it have went, maybe?
Oh, maybe a couple of blocks. Main Street, Clark, maybe. It wasn't very big. Most of it was even down around where downtown is. Down below 7th Street, School Street, 5th Street, 6th Street, there were houses all down there, even further down than that. This all started right around the 300, 400, and 500 block.
Interesting. So what was the next step if they all had wells and privies and the well in the center of town? Then what? How'd it go from there?
Well, eventually the city council agreed to go down to the Walnut River just southeast of town and build a small dam to slow the flow of the Walnut River so they could suck water out of the river. And they had a small plant down there along the river where they filtered it somewhat, and they piped through a system to come up to serve the business and the residential area.
So that was the public water there until probably when they built the city lake, maybe?
Well, it was public water for a long time. Yeah, eventually they built the city lake, which was out in the country. Then even after that, they got a lot of water from Santa Fe Lake, which was built by the Santa Fe Railroad to service the trains, to provide water for the trains for steam engines. And then that eventually came to the city also for water supply.
So the city lake, let's go back to it. Now that was built in the 1930s by the Works Progress Administration,
right.
WPA. And that was out in the country.
Oh yeah, that was a farm.
That's Elm Creek that they dammed up, right?
Correct. And it's not used rarely for city water anymore, but it's used primarily for the city recreation.
Right. It's just hard to imagine that lake was sitting out there in the country because, I mean, you told me you used to hunt ducks on there.
Oh, yeah, there was duck blinds around there and hunting. And you went to the city lake or to the city park, which became Garvin Park. That was going to the country. It was all gravel road going.
That's amazing. So we got a larger water supply then. We didn't need the river water. And if I remember right, they started using a lot of that water out of the river for the refinery, right? The old Saccone refinery.
Well, Saccone also built a little dam on down a little ways below the city dam, but they finally got so big that they couldn't get enough water. The refinery was using clear up into the 50s or 60s. They were using 1 million gallons a day for refining, and the city of Augusta was using 1 million gallons a day.
Oh
So
my gosh.
that's a lot of water coming out of one little lake.
Wow, so they were pumping the river dry and draining the lake too. Now, later on, I guess it would have been after El Dorado Lake was built in the early 80s, right? That we started getting water from El Dorado.
In the meantime, when it was real dry times in the 50s, El Dorado, Augusta went together and run a pipeline all the way down the Santa Fe right-of-way to Mulvane. And they were pumping water from Mulvane up to Augusta and El Dorado for city and refinery usage. And that was water coming out of the Arkansas River, wells down there.
I didn't know that. See, I thought because we provide water to Mulvane now, right?
Well, yeah, they reversed that process and we're shipping water to them.
See, I thought that just happened. I didn't know it was coming from Mulvane up this way.
Yeah.
But El Dorado had the refineries and Augusta had refineries, so we were using lots of water.
It was a lot of water. It was dry times in the 50s, and they had to pump a lot of water from the wells down along the Arkansas River at Mulvane. It was not particularly good water, but it was wet. That's about all you could say.
About all you could say about
it. Didn't taste well, and they couldn't. I mean, it was medically okay, I guess, but it didn't smell or taste good. When you pour water come out of a faucet, you'd almost look like you had a head on it. It had foam.
Really?
Yeah, it was
gross.
It was not good.
So when did that change?
Well, that eventually cleared up, and then they decided to build the El Dorado Reservoir and then get water from that.
Okay.
And they still do.
So the water plant that we have over here across the railroad tracks, when was that built?
I don't know, so I shouldn't say, but they had a water plant down there on the river. Then they moved up there to that over on the east side of town. And I don't know exactly when that was built. And it's been redone 2 or 3 times.
Right, it's all modernized now. And we actually have best tasting water of any town around here, if you ask me.
I think so, but and a lot of people still got the Mulvane water in their mind and they think it tastes terrible.
I remember being on a well in the country where it was real limey and, just had that smell. And then when I come to town, and man, the coffee tasted so much better and your clothes aren't yellowed, and we have good water in this town and lots of it now. Well, that's really interesting how, something we take so for granted, we just turn on the garden hose and water the garden or wash the car, get a drink of water, and we just take it for granted. But to think that within a century, we went from private wells and outhouses to fresh, healthy drinking water. It's amazing. And then to think of all the lines and the infrastructure they've had to put in and maintain over the years so that we can have that.
And the same with the sewer system. You don't even think about it. It's just there.
Right. Well, maybe that's something we'll talk about next time is our sewer system. And yeah, we'll talk about that as well. All these things that affect real estate. And I remember I grew up in Andover and we did not have public water. It wasn't until I was in probably middle school or high school before the city of Wichita brought city water to Andover. I remember the days of wells and pretty limited resources as far as water goes in Andover. And, that's only 45 years ago that city water come to Andover. Anyway, I tell you what, why don't you do some research on the sewers? Okay. I bet we'd like to hear about that because I'm curious as to what was going on. In the meantime, we're going to go find some real estate to sell. And if you guys have something to sell, give us a call. We've got some buyers. We have really good buyers right now. And we've got the money to get it done for you. We're ready to go to work. And I'm going to send Keith off to do some homework. And we'll have another great story about sewers in Augusta coming up right away. And as always, have a blessed day.